The carriage smelled like rain and old leather, and the particular kind of dread that settles in your chest when you've already made the decision and there's no road back. Alara counted the receipts, not because she needed to. She had memorized every number 3 weeks ago, sitting at her father's desk while he explained the arrangement in that voice he used when he'd already decided something and was only bothering to speak because silence felt rude. She knew the dowry figure. She knew the estate name. She knew the name of the man she was going to marry. She just needed something to do with her hands. The moors outside the carriage window were the color of an old bruise, all purple and gray, and the kind of flat that made you feel like the sky was pressing down. She had grown up near a river. Green things. Noise. Here there was nothing but wind, and the occasional miserable-looking sheep standing in a field like it had forgotten what it was supposed to be doing. She folded the receipts. 14 months, her father had said. Maybe less. The doctor was not optimistic. She had not asked what happened after. That part was understood. The carriage turned through iron gates that needed painting, down a long drive lined with trees that had grown in on themselves, branches tangling overhead like they were trying to block out the light on purpose. And then Ashford Hall appeared at the end of it, all stone and gabled windows, and the kind of architecture that doesn't say welcome so much as it says, "We have been here longer than you, and we will be here after." Alara put the receipts in her bag. Well, there it was. The wedding took 16 minutes, she counted. The chapel was small and cold and smelled like candle wax and stone. Lord Callum Ashford stood at the front of it, with the careful posture of a man who has learned to hold himself upright through effort rather than health. And when she walked toward him, he gave her a look that was the most honest thing she would see in that building. Apologetic, grateful, a little frightened, like a man who knew exactly what he was asking of her and was going to spend the rest of his life being sorry for it. She liked him immediately. She said the words. He said the words. The vicar seemed to be in a hurry, which she respected. The Duke stood at the back. She was aware of him the way you are aware of a closed door in a room, not looking at it directly, but always knowing it's there. Aldrich Ashford, 31. The title, the house, the fact of all of this. He had dark hair and an expression that had been pressed so flat it had stopped resembling a feeling at all, and when her eyes crossed the room and landed on him for exactly 1 second, he did not look away. She looked away. The ring was cold. 16 minutes and she was Lady Ashford, wife of a dying man, resident of a house that felt less like a home and more like a very large argument someone had abandoned mid-sentence. Callum was kind in the way of people who have been given very little time and have decided not to waste any of it on performance. He did not pretend to love her, she did not pretend to love him. They had both arrived at this arrangement through a chain of necessity too long to untangle, and there was a quiet relief in not having to act otherwise. What they did, instead, was talk. He told her about the estate, the history of it, the way his grandfather had added the east wing and immediately regretted it, the fact that the library had not been properly organized since 1847 and was, in his words, an absolute disgrace. She told him about the river near her father's house, the books she preferred, the fact that she had once spent an entire winter teaching herself Latin for no reason she could now explain. He found this funnier than most people would have. "You're going to be bored here," he told her one evening. They were in the sitting room he used most, the one with the good fire and the bad wallpaper, and he had a blanket over his legs that he pretended not to need. "I'm not easily bored," she said. "That's exactly what a bored person says." She looked at him. "I'm genuinely not. You organized the medicine cabinet yesterday." It was chaos. It was a medicine cabinet. She said nothing, which was its own kind of answer, and he laughed, which turned into coughing, which she had learned to sit through without fussing, because fussing made it worse, and he hated being watched through it. She picked up her book. He settled. The fire did what fires do. It was, she thought, the best marriage she had seen up close. That was a terrible thought that she put down immediately. The Duke ate dinner with them twice a week. Never more, never less. He was unfailingly correct. Wine poured, questions answered, no visible evidence of being a person with feelings or an interior life. He asked Callum about his health in the way of someone completing a task on a list, and Callum answered in the way of someone who understood the list and did not blame the person completing it. She watched this exchange and understood something about the two of them that neither of them had told her. She did not ask about it. She learned the house the way she learned most things, methodically, without announcing she was doing it. There were 31 rooms in the main building, 12 in the east wing, and 4 that had been sealed so long the keys had been lost. The kitchens were excellent, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Tate, ran them with the calm authority of someone who has understood for a long time that the house would fall apart without her, and has made her peace with this. The stables had 6 horses. The library had approximately 3,000 books, in an order that suggested the original cataloger had simply given up halfway through and began placing things by color. She fixed the library. It took 11 days. She did not ask permission. No one told her to stop. On the 12th day, Callum came in and stood in the doorway and looked at the shelves for a long moment. "Good God," he said. "I know. You alphabetized within subject categories. Obviously." He looked at her. "You're going to be fine here," he said. It was quieter than his other sentences. She looked back at the shelves because it was easier than looking at his face when he said things like that. "Don't be maudlin." "I'm never maudlin. I'm dying. There's a difference." She said nothing. He went back to his room. She stood in the library for a while and counted the spines on the shelf closest to her. 114. She counted them twice. The Duke was in the library 3 weeks later. She didn't know this until she rounded a corner between history and natural philosophy and nearly walked directly into him. He was holding a book, not reading it, holding it, and he had the look of someone who had come in here to be alone and had been caught at it. She stopped. He looked at her. "I apologize," she said. "I didn't know you were here." "It's your library as much as mine," he said, which was technically true and socially complex in ways neither of them addressed. She looked at the book in his hand. Agricultural Management Practices, 1831. "If you're looking for the farming texts, I put them in the east section near the window, grouped by region first, then date." He looked at the book, then at her. "I was looking for this specifically, then you found it." "I found it because you moved it." From where it was, wedged between a French novel and a book of pressed butterflies for reasons I still can't account for, to where it belongs. Something happened in his face. It was brief and almost invisible, and it was the closest she had seen him come to humor. "Grouped by region," he said, "then date." He put the book under his arm and left. She stood between history and natural philosophy and thought, well, that was something. She didn't examine what kind of something. That seemed like a road that went somewhere she wasn't prepared to walk down yet. Callum died on a Tuesday. It was raining. It had been raining for 4 days. She had been sitting beside him through the nights for the past 2 weeks, because he slept better knowing there was someone in the room, which he explained with the exact same apologetic embarrassment he had used the day they married. "You don't have to." "I know," she said. "Lie down." He lay down. She sat in the chair by the window with her book, and the lamp turned low, and he slept, and she read, and outside the rain came down, and this was how it went. The morning of the Tuesday she woke up in the chair with her neck at an angle that would trouble her for a week, and she knew before she was fully awake. The room had a different quality to it, a stillness. She sat in the chair for a long time. Then she got up and told Mrs. Tate, and Mrs. Tate told the Duke, and the house filled with the particular quiet of a place where someone has just left it. Ilara went to the library. She did not cry. She had made a private agreement with herself years ago about crying, which was that she would not do it in front of anyone or anywhere she could be walked in on, and she maintained this agreement now. She pulled out a book she had read before, and read it again without retaining any of it. The words moved past her eyes like weather. He had been good to her. That was the whole and simple truth of it, and there was a particular kind of grief that comes not from losing someone you loved like a star, bright and consuming, but from losing someone you had just begun to know was important. Like losing the first chapter of a book that had been getting interesting. She sat with this feeling and did not name it, and did not explain it, and did not share it with anyone. That evening she told the Duke she would begin making arrangements to leave. He said, "No, just that," looking at his desk, pen in hand, no particular inflection. She blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me." She had, in fact, heard him perfectly clearly. The problem was the word had not yet organized itself into a meaning she could accept. She stood on the other side of his desk in the room he used as a study, all dark wood and closed drapes, and the faint smell of beeswax, and she looked at the back of his head, where he had returned his attention to his correspondence, and she thought, "Good God, I am a widow," she said. "I have no legal obligation to remain." "You have no legal obligation to leave either," he said, still writing. "The estate is your home. The arrangement stands." "The arrangement," she said, very carefully, "was a marriage to your brother, who is dead." He set down the pen. He turned to look at her. Whatever she had expected from that look, hostility, defensiveness, some version of the explanation she was owed, she did not get it. He just looked at her, level and unreadable and completely infuriating. "The arrangement stands," he said again. He picked up the pen. She left before she said something she couldn't take back. She was not a prisoner. She told herself this, standing at the window of her room, watching the grounds in the gray morning light. Not a prisoner. The doors opened. The gates opened, she assumed. She was a person capable of walking through a door and down a drive and onto a road. The problem was, the road went where, exactly? Her father's house had a new wife in it, a woman who was perfectly pleasant in the way of people who have replaced you and are too kind to say so out loud. Her dowry was gone. Her name was now Ashford. The solicitors she knew were from her father's world, which was a world that had transacted her out of itself. She wrote 3 letters. 2 of the solicitors wrote back to inform her, in gentle but unmistakable terms, that they were in fact retained by the Ashford estate and would not be able to assist her with a matter adverse to it. She found this out on a Wednesday. She stood in the hallway with the 2 letters and looked at them for a long moment. Then she went to find Mrs. Tate and asked her where the closest post office was, and how long it took to get a letter to London, and whether there were any solicitors in the area who were not, to her knowledge, already employed by the Duke of Ashford. Mrs. Tate gave her tea, and a name, and the careful expression of someone who has worked in a house long enough to understand its weather. She stopped trying to leave by force somewhere around the 3rd week, not because she had accepted the situation, not because she had forgiven it, but because she had begun to understand that the thing holding her here was not a lock or a gate or a man at a desk. It was a structure, and structures required more than frustration to dismantle. They required understanding, so she started paying attention differently. She had always noticed the house. Now she noticed the Duke in it. He rose before anyone else. She found this out by accident. She had started sleeping badly and had come down for a book at 5:30 and found the study already lit. She stopped at the door. He was at the desk with his ledgers open and a cup of tea gone cold beside his elbow, and he was working with the focused, contained energy of a man who had learned that the hours before the house woke up were the only ones that truly belonged to him. She went back to bed without him knowing she'd been there. The next morning she came down at 5 again. The light was on. She thought about this for several days. She found the other things more slowly. The stable hand who'd been kept on despite a leg that made him useless for half the work, because he'd been with the estate for 20 years. The widow in the East tenancy whose roof had been repaired without her asking. The ledger that she found by accident when she was helping Mrs. Tate with the household accounts. Or rather, the ledger she found that showed a column of payments she didn't recognize, which turned out, after very careful examination, to be Callum's debts. All of them, over years, paid quietly, without Callum being told. She closed the ledger and put it back exactly where she'd found it. She went to the library. She sat down. She picked up a book and put it back down. She thought, oh. She thought, no. She thought, well, that's a fine kettle. They talked more as October came in. Not about anything that mattered technically. Weather, the price of wool, the state of the lower field fence. She mentioned that the East Wing corridor had a draft that was going to become a genuine problem by December. He said he'd have someone look at it. Someone looked at it 2 days later. She began to notice the way he moved through the house, not with the ease of ownership, the way some people fill their inherited spaces, but with the careful attention of a person responsible for something he does not entirely trust himself to protect. He touched the walls sometimes, not for any reason, just his hand on the stone, the way you check that a thing is still there. She found this more affecting than she wanted to. They had dinner one evening in November, when both of them had separately arrived at the dining room at the same time, with the same book under their arms, different copies of the same natural history text, which was the kind of coincidence that a novel would use as a romantic device, but which, in reality, just made both of them awkward for approximately 45 seconds. She put her copy on the table. He put his on the table. They sat down and ate soup. The cataloging system, he said finally. The alphabetizing, within subject categories. Yes. He looked at his soup. It's better now. She looked at her soup. I know. Silence. A comfortable one, which was worse in certain ways than an uncomfortable one, because comfortable silences required no negotiation. They just happened. You couldn't defend against them. She poured herself more wine and thought about the ledger with Callum's debts and did not think about it. Winter arrived the way it always does on moors, not gradually, with polite warning, but all at once, like a door slamming. The grounds went white. The wind found every gap in the stone. Mrs. Tate added a third fire to the daily routine without being asked. Alara burrowed into the library, and the library became, without any formal declaration, hers. She was in it most mornings. On the 3 mornings a week, the Duke used it. She moved to the corner by the south window, and he used the reading table, and neither of them found this strange anymore, which was its own kind of strange. He was reading natural history. She was working her way through the estate records she had found. Not snooping, technically. She had simply started in the section marked Estate Management 1820 to 1869, and found it considerably more interesting than anyone had probably intended. Did your grandfather actually drain the North Pond in 1843? She said one morning, not looking up. A pause. Yes. To find a ring his wife dropped. Yes. She looked up. Did he find it? No. She looked back down. That's the most romantic and most useless thing I've read all winter. He said nothing, but she heard, or perhaps imagined, the almost sound of something that was not quite a laugh. She did not point this out. She found the letter by accident. She was not looking for it. She was not going through Callum's things with any particular purpose. She had been asked by Mrs. Tate to check whether there were books in his room that needed returning to the library, and she had been doing this in the careful, methodical way she did most things, and in the third drawer of the writing desk she found a letter in Callum's handwriting addressed to no one. She should not have read it. She read it. It was short. He had written it sometime in the last weeks. The handwriting was shakier than she had known it. Mostly it was quiet things. Instructions about the horses. A note about Mrs. Tate's wages, the name of a solicitor who was actually trustworthy, which she registered with a kind of stunned gratitude. And then, near the end, she makes the house feel less like a monument. Keep her, if she'll have it. She folded the letter. She put it back in the drawer. She picked up the 2 books she'd come for and left the room and went back to the library and sat in her corner and opened a book and did not read it for a very long time. Keep her, if she'll have it. The "it" was doing so much work in that sentence. It could mean the house. It could mean the arrangement. It could mean... She closed the book. She picked up a different book. She read 4 pages before she realized she was reading Agricultural Practices by Region, 1831, and had absolutely no memory of picking it up. She did not change how she behaved. This was a decision she made consciously, and then lived by the way you live by a rule you've set yourself, with vigilance, with occasional resentment, with the knowledge that the alternative was something she wasn't ready to examine. But she noticed things she had not permitted herself to notice before. The way he sat at dinner when he was genuinely tired versus when he was performing composure. The difference was small, a certain set to the shoulders, a quality of stillness that was less contained and more exhausted. She had watched people her whole life, in the way of someone who learned early that the world was not always going to announce its intentions, and she was good at this, and she found, to her great irritation, that she was getting better at reading him specifically. He noticed things too. She began to notice that he noticed things. The day she came to dinner with ink on her left hand from the morning's cataloging, and he said nothing but passed her the cloth on the table before she'd reached for it. The time she had a headache, and he moved his chair at the breakfast table without any announcement so that she wasn't facing the window. Small things. The kind of things you only do for someone when you have been watching them carefully enough to know what they need before they know they need it. She did not mention any of this. He did not mention it either. They were, she thought, two people having two completely different silent conversations in the same room, and neither of them was going to be the first to speak out loud. This was fine. This was completely fine. She went to bed and lay in the dark and thought, "Good God, Ilara." The cousin arrived in January. His name was something Ashford. She had lost track of the Ashford family tree after the third branch, and he arrived in a very clean carriage with a solicitor she did not recognize, and an air of cheerful, righteous energy that she immediately did not trust. He was, it turned out, acting in her interest. She found this out in the drawing room over tea that she had not offered and Mrs. Tate had provided out of sheer unstoppable hospitality, and she sat with her cup in her hand and listened to the cousin explain that there was a case to be made. A strong case, his solicitor said, nodding with the enthusiasm of a man about to bill someone, that Ilara's continued residence at Ashford Hall, without her free and informed consent, represented a legal gray area that reflected poorly on the estate and really ought to be addressed. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the expression of a man who was certain he was rescuing someone. She said, "How did you know about my situation?" He said, "Friends of your father's. They wrote, 'My father's friends,'" she said, very pleasantly, "wrote to you." "Yes. Not to me." A brief pause. "We were concerned that you might not feel you were in a position to what?" Another pause. "To speak freely." She looked at her tea, then at the solicitor, then at the cousin, then at the door, behind which she was almost certain, she did not know why she was certain, but she was. The Duke of Ashford was standing. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I'll speak to the Duke." She found him in the study. He was standing at the window, not sitting at the desk, which was unusual. He had his hands behind his back. He looked like a man braced for something. She closed the door. "Your cousin," she said. "He is technically a cousin, yes." "He brought a solicitor." "I'm aware." She looked at him. He had not turned around. "Are you going to tell me to stay again?" A very long pause. He turned. Whatever she had prepared herself to find in his face, the flat, managed blankness, the compressed nothing she had grown accustomed to, it wasn't quite there. What was there instead was something much harder to look at, which was a person trying to look like he was composed and not entirely managing it. "You may go," he said. "You were never required to stay. He stopped, started again. Callum's letter had no legal standing. "I was managing the situation. Poorly." She looked at him. He looked back. Managing the situation. The ledger with the debts. The solicitors quietly retained. The gates that had never technically been locked. The road she could technically have walked down. The freedom she technically always had. Managing the situation. "You," she said, "have an absolutely disastrous relationship with plain speech." He said nothing. "Do you know," she said, "that someone should probably tell you that directly, and often, so that you have the opportunity to address it." Still nothing. "The Northwood," she said. "You said tomorrow. Weeks ago." A pause. Small. "Yes. It's been several tomorrows." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face shifted. Not dramatically. Nothing in him did anything dramatically. But it shifted. A small, deep thing, like a stone moving in a riverbed. "I'll have horses readied," he said. She looked at him one more second. "After breakfast," she said. She left. In the corridor, she stood alone for a moment with her hand flat against the cold stone wall and breathed the way she only breathed when there was definitely no one watching. Sweet Lord, what a fine kettle. They rode out at first light. The moors in winter were a different country from the moors in autumn. Everything stripped down, the heather gray and flat, the sky enormous and the color of pewter. Cold enough that her breath came out in small clouds, and the horse was restless under her, wanting to move faster than she was allowing. She let it. The Duke rode beside her without racing her, which she appreciated. The north wood appeared at the edge of the estate, ancient, dense, the trees older than the house and clearly unbothered by this fact. They rode in along a narrow track, and the sound of wind dropped to almost nothing, replaced by the particular silence of old trees in winter, snow on branches, a distant bird, the creak of wood settling. She pulled up. He pulled up beside her. She looked up through the branches at the white sky above them. Callum knew, she said. She had not planned to say it. It arrived without asking. He did not ask what she meant. He knew what she meant. He usually knew things, Aldrich said. Quiet. Not the managed quiet. The other kind. She looked at the trees. He looked at the trees. I'm not leaving, she said. A pause. Longer than most. I know. I want to make clear, she said, that I'm not staying because of a letter, or a debt, or a legal gray area. I'm stating, plainly, since someone in this situation needs to, that I am choosing to remain. Another pause. Understood, he said. Good, she said. Now tell me about these trees. He was quiet for a moment. Then, because he was who he was, because he had a relationship with plain speech that they were apparently going to spend a great deal of time working on, he said, "They're very old." "Good God," she said. "That's your contribution." "The oldest is approximately 400 years old. My grandfather used to bring his children out here in the spring when the bluebells came in. You can't see it now, obviously, but I'll come back in spring," she said. He stopped talking. She looked ahead through the trees, where the track curved out of sight. "You'll show me," she said. It was not a question. He did not answer immediately. When he did, it was brief, contained, the only kind of thing he knew how to say yet. "Yes," he said. She nodded. They rode on into the trees. No particular destination, no particular hurry. The cold came in off the moors at the edge of the wood, and the branches closed above them, and the world outside got quiet. She did not reach for his hand. He did not offer it. But they rode at the same pace, without discussing it, the way you ride beside someone when the distance between you has already changed into something else, without either of you saying so. Behind them, Ashford Hall sat in its winter fields, all stone and old gates, and a library that was now in the correct order, and an east corridor that no longer drafted, and a ledger of paid debts in a drawer no one opened, and one letter from a man who had known both of them better than they knew each other, tucked away and folded twice. She makes the house feel less like a monument. Keep her, if she'll have it. She'd have it. That was enough. That was the whole and simple truth of it, and neither of them needed to say so.